Good afternoon and welcome to a special edition of the Rotoworld Basketball Show. I'm Raphielle Johnson, joined as always by Noah Rubin. Without Dan Titus at Yahoo Sports this week because he's traveling for the upcoming holiday. Obviously, with Christmas being on Wednesday, we are recording this 2 days early, ahead of a 14-game bonanza on Monday. Noah, are you hydrated?
Probably not enough yet. Right now, I'm trying to get caffeinated before I even worry about getting hydrated, just to make sure, because it's going to be a late, fun night for us. But yeah, I think every team plays. I didn't even check to see which two teams don't play, but maybe you have that information, or one of us can look it up. But
the two teams who are inactive tonight are New Orleans and Sacramento. And if I'm not mistaken, neither one of them play again until Thursday, since they're not going to be playing on Christmas. So, yeah, 2-game week for both of those teams. Those are teams you're probably going to want to avoid in terms of fantasy pickups for obvious reasons. Also playing 2 games this week. Let's see. We've got Cleveland and the Clippers. The Clippers are a bit interesting because Kawhi Leonard, his status, he's been practicing recently. We'll see if he's back by the end of this week, but if you played fantasy basketball enough, you've probably been down this road with Kawhi at least once in your managerial career.
At least once. I'm trying to think. I know I have him in, I think, 2 leagues this year, just sitting on my IR in one of them, and then the other one was a draft-only league, so he's just been sitting in a roster spot, just taking up space. So I'm very excited for him to be playing, and hopefully he can be Kawhi Leonard. That'd be great.
Definitely. Definitely be great. Let's get into some of the top storylines. I think had some huge performances from the top 2 players in fantasy basketball. Nikola Jokic put up another triple-double last night, but Victor Wembanyama, he did something that only 5 other players in NBA history have done. He's the youngest of the 6, 30-plus points and 10-plus blocks in a game in their easy win over the Trailblazers. So given what we've seen from Jokic, not just this year, but over the long haul, and then Wembanyama's emergence, do you think he could potentially jump Jokic this season, or are we a bit premature with that?
I think it's a pretty interesting conversation to have, which is why I'm kind of glad it's here, because at first I was like, oh, like it's just kind of depends on who you want. But in reality, like, they provide different things. But if we're just looking at strictly 9-cat rankings, like Jokic is still number 1 as of now. They provide different like stats. Like Wemby's going to get you more threes, more blocks, a little bit of a higher free throw percentage, not, dramatically better, but a little bit. And then Jokic scoring more and more rebounds, more assists, more steals. Obviously, the higher field goal percentage is a big thing for him as well. And I think, honestly, what the main difference between them may end up being in the long run for this season, I guess the long run for this season, is the minutes difference. Like Jokic is playing 37.5 minutes per game. Wemby's at 32.4. Denver needs Jokic playing almost every minute for them to even stay afloat. Whereas the Spurs, they're in a little bit of a different situation. They're not fully rebuilding. They're like, maybe we can make the postseason this year. If not, like whatever. We'll just get another lottery pick or 2 or 3, depending on every other team that they have picks for. And we'll just continue this rebuild and we'll be dominant here in a couple of years. Whereas Denver, it's like, man, if they don't make some noise this year, like they still have their players locked up for a while. So like they can run it back, but it's like these players aren't getting any younger. So they need Jokic out there. That's the minutes difference. And I think that could end up being the difference that keeps Wemby from, overtaking Jokic this year. But it's not because of a production difference. It's not because of a talent difference. It's simply opportunity.
Yeah, it's a good point on the minutes. The Spurs, we've seen them take a conservative approach with their younger players, whether it's injuries or just the developmental process. So that may be what keeps Wemby out of that number 2 spot. But I think if anything, his recent run just makes the early hand wringing that much funnier. Some people he shouldn't have been in the conversation. Like, well, let's let it play out here. And obviously we've reached that point. So I think it's going to be a fun conversation to have, not just this year, but for the next probably 4 or 5 years, or whenever Jokic decides that he'd rather raise his horses in Sombor. So,
I liked your mocking fantasy manager's voice. That was really unique.
Yeah, I try not to do it because, heaven knows I've had my roster mistakes this year and in years past, but it's like one of those conversations that it just didn't need to be had. Like, we don't need to overreact like 1 or 2 weeks to start the season. That's just my my opinion on it.
That's what's fun, is overreacting to small sample sizes. That's what makes fantasy basketball and sports in general fun.
Mhm. Fair enough. Little contract news. Alex Caruso, I think he's underwhelmed a bit from a fantasy standpoint this year, but it's one of those cases where his value to his team bit higher than his value to fantasy managers right now. The Thunder made sure to lock him up. 4 years, $81 million. Does this change anything for you in terms of your fantasy outlook for Caruso for the remainder of the season?
Not really. I think he's still a great source of steals, and
Yeah.
that's about it. He hasn't shot the ball well at all this season, and I think that's kind of the main reason that he hasn't been a great option in 9-cat
Mhm.
leagues. Again, unless you just really want a steal streamer, in which case that's totally fine. He can help you with that. I don't think that them giving him this extension is going to increase his minutes. I don't think it's going to be I mean, even if he starts shooting the ball better, it's not correlated. It just happens to happen. So it's good to see because he deserves it. He's that talented of a player, even if he hasn't been great in fantasy. And he's gonna help them have a chance to win a championship this season. I think they're one of the best defensive teams in the league. So having one of the best defenders in the league, not even starting for your team, yeah,
Mhm.
they're gonna be dangerous. And having him locked up for at least a few more seasons on, I wouldn't call it just like a team friendly deal, but it's not like a massive contract
Yeah.
for how good of a defender he is. So I think it was a good deal.
Yeah, at this point, they're at a stage where if they can lock up some of their supplementary pieces at decent, price ranges now, that'll help when it comes time to extend, say, a Chet Holmgren, because he's going to command a hefty amount of money there. Jalen Williams as well, whenever he gets his next contract. SGA got his, but there's going to come a point where they're going to have to give him another contract, most likely.
Mm-hmm.
So every opportunity you have to take care of some of these guys now definitely helps. I think to your point about his shooting, he's shooting 38.5% from the field this season. He was at about 47% last year with the Bulls. So that's a pretty big drop off. You're talking about a decrease of a little under 4 points per game compared to last season, 5.7 now versus 10.1 last season. So, yeah, the offensive drop off has been an issue, but if anything, I think that's more about the availability, the injuries that he's
Mm-hmm.
had to deal with. So, fantasy, he can still probably be a late round guy, but I think that's kind of his ceiling this year. We'll see what happens in 25, 26.
Yeah.
And speaking of injuries, Damian Lillard, missed the final 2 games of Week 8 with a calf injury. I think it was a calf strain, if I'm not mistaken, and I think
Mm-hmm.
he's been ruled out for Monday as well.
With an illness, actually. He's not
Okay.
for the same reason as before, but I think he had been ruled out, and then they were like, that's actually because of an illness. I don't think that's because the calf wasn't bothering him anymore. And then obviously Giannis is out as well.
Okay.
But we're getting Chris Middleton still playing, and there's been a couple other guys. We've been able to see some depth in Milwaukee, some guys be able to step up. Maybe not great streaming options, but a couple guys that have stepped up. What do you kind of think about the way that things have gone for the Bucks, especially in that last game?
Yeah, I think Bobby Portis had one of the games of his professional basketball life when Giannis was out last game. So he's already rostered in most leagues. So you're not really going to be able to stream him outside of your shallower formats. Ryan Rollins might be worth a roll of the dice in terms of streamability, because we saw that first game where they started AJ Green. It didn't go well at all in Cleveland. And obviously, the Cavaliers have the NBA's best record, so you knew that was going to be a tough task. But not starting a point guard was something that Doc Rivers decided to rectify the following game. Went with Rollins, and he played pretty well. So even with a 14-game night, it might be worth a shot to kind of roll him out there and see what he provides.
Yeah, those were the names I was going to mention, because obviously Bobby Portis went absolutely sicko mode. And then Ryan Rollins, I think Bucks fans have been clamoring for him to be the starter when Dame is out, or just to be kind of the backup point guard, but it hasn't just always happened. Like you said, the game before AJ Green had started, I thought DeLon Wright was another option that could start. He ended up playing the other point guard minutes and not being all that productive, but we know what he can be. A good source of assists and steals. But yeah, I think Rollins was impressive. Chris Middleton getting his minutes up was good to see. AJ Green off the bench doing more than hitting threes, I thought was a little bit encouraging. 6 assists and 2 steals. And then Gary Trent Jr. was also pretty productive off the bench. So typically the Bucks are like, yeah, you have Giannis and Dame. You have Middleton when he's healthy. You have Brook Lopez for threes and blocks. And then Bobby Portis, I guess, is a standard league guy. But he obviously is at his best when those stars aren't playing. And then everybody else is like, yeah, like you have no chance of rostering them because there's just not going to be enough minutes or shots for them. So this was fun to see for, I want to say, the first time since Doc Rivers was the head coach, outside of some other games where like late season last year where they were just relying on some other guys. But it was kind of cool to see that, hey, they have some depth. Maybe getting them some extra run this early in the season will just pay off for them long term.
Yeah, that's a good point. And plus, playing Chicago tonight, I think they still lead the NBA in pace, and they're not very good defensively either. So it could track to be a high-scoring game, which may benefit a few of those guys from a streaming standpoint.
Yeah, and then I think they're off until Thursday after that. So it's just like pretty much a full week, if not a little bit more, of rest for those guys, I think at least for Dame. And then they play Brooklyn on Thursday. So not saying they will not play again, but like they could say, hey, it's Brooklyn. Let's just not play them tonight. So we'll see. I think it hopefully it wasn't like we won the in-season tournament. It's kind of taking our foot off the gas, because I don't think that's the case or makes sense at all. But it's almost like hey, we're a couple games over 500. We had this atrocious start. Let's, dial it back a little bit to make sure that all of our guys are 100% healthy in April and May. And if it gets to it, June, because if we push these guys too hard now, then maybe that doesn't, we deal with these injuries again in the playoffs. So Giannis has been injured in the playoffs for the last 2 years. I think it's the last 2 years. So, and we don't want that to happen. So it could be something like that, because they are in a spot now where they should feel comfortable, but they've dug themselves out of the hole that they dug themselves into to start the year.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And think about it. Orlando's kind of fallen off with the injuries. So they're in a good spot, especially to be in the Eastern Conference, so yeah, it's a good point there. Moving on to Dallas, Luka Doncic, he missed the last 2 games to end week 8 with a heel injury. I think he's still questionable for tonight, if I'm not mistaken, against Portland. So is it Spencer Dinwiddie time?
I think I don't think that Luka, if he misses tonight's game, I don't really see him missing the Christmas Day game. I think that he'll be back by that. He's questionable. So it just kind of depends. If Luka's out, then yeah, sure. Spencer Dinwiddie started their last 2, been pretty solid in those. So I think he would be potentially worth a streaming, for tonight. But at the same time, if you're having almost every team play, not as many people are going to need a streamer for this game. So in the scenario that Luka doesn't play on Christmas, which I don't think is a likely scenario, then yeah, Spencer Dinwiddie could be a Christmas Day hero.
I've long been skeptical of Dinwiddie's fantasy value, but this is a spot, especially if Luka's out on Wednesday, where he would be worth the ad. So Spencer Dinwiddie, I think PJ Washington, he's already someone who's already rostered in a lot of leagues. His production tends to increase when Luka's out. So I think maybe Klay Thompson gets some more shots as well. So that'll be worth watching if Luka remains sidelined. Unfortunate injury news in Orlando. They've already been hit hard. Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner out. Moritz Wagner went down with a torn ACL during their win over the Heat on Saturday. Oh boy, that stinks, because he's been playing really well this year. I just think it's even more reason to be all in on Goga Bitadze. My question to you would be, is Wendell Carter Jr. a player out of sheer necessity at this point?
Yeah, it's that's an interesting one, because I'm not a huge Wendell Carter fan in fantasy.
Yeah,
I think he can, he's a really good player, but I just think in fantasy he's kind of he's not. He can stretch the floor. He's not a great source of threes. He can rebound pretty well, but he's not a great rebounder. He can block shots, but he just doesn't block a ton of shots. I don't know. He doesn't shoot a super high percentage. So I do think that the minutes will go up, because at this point, they're starting both Wendell and Goga. Maybe they move out of that when Paolo's back and they just start one of them and it's a 24-minute split. But as of right now, they're starting both. But I don't think you can take both off the floor at the same time. So you could potentially get 30+ minutes out of both of them. And just based off the opportunity, yeah, I think that both of them could provide standard league value, even if, I mean, Goga's been a better fantasy option this year. So I think it helps both. I'd prefer Goga as of now. But I think it'll be interesting to kind of keep an eye on, especially when Paolo gets back, which shouldn't be that much longer.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Jonathan Isaac, obviously, he's someone that we all want to believe in, but the injuries have just been too much at this point.
Yeah.
If you see him play 20 minutes, then go ahead and grab him. But until that happens, I don't really think there's any reason to run the risk of taking up a roster spot with him, unfortunately.
Agreed. Yeah, he's good, but
yeah,
the injuries, man, it stinks.
Mm-hmm. Yep. To move on to a couple rookies here. I've been singing this young man's praises for quite a while, and he looked pretty well against Jokic. He looked pretty good against Jokic on Sunday in the overtime loss for the Pelicans. Yves Missi, I've long held that he's someone that fantasy managers should kind of ignore his ranking and go with the role in terms of deciding whether or not to pick him up. What have you seen from him recently, and where do you stand on his fantasy value, maybe for the rest of the season?
Yeah, I mean, I think he is a guy that you should be rostering. Like there isn't really a reason to not roster him if he's available in your league, which I haven't checked his availability in Yahoo recently, but it's every time I've looked, it's been criminally underrated, or criminally lower than it should be, just because he's a guy that can, I mean, not guaranteed a double-double every night, but pretty close, can get you over a block, shoots a high percentage, like just classic big man stats.
Mm-hmm.
But he's also got no competition for minutes. Like a guy like Clint Capella, if I'm not mistaken, is rostered in more leagues, and he's getting like 20 minutes per game at times, whereas Misi's been seeing over 30 pretty recently, with his competition for minutes being Daniel Tice. And then in Atlanta, Okongwu's out, but even like Larry Nance Jr. has been playing a larger role, which I think we'll get into a little bit later. He's been playing more minutes than Capella over the last couple games, and the Hawks are kind of like, oh wait, we have a center that can shoot threes. Like this is actually really fun with a passer like Trae Young, and everybody's like, oh yeah, no kidding. But anyways, I think Misi is definitely a guy. He's coming off of a monster game against Jokic, like you said, 21 points, 9 boards, 2 steals, 3 blocks, 40 minutes played, high percentage shooting. Yeah, he's not gonna veer from those stats. Like he's not going to hit threes. He may get you 2 assists at most. And he's not going to shoot a high percentage from the free throw line, but a lot of other centers have had a lot of fantasy success without doing those things. And I just think that he just kind of fits that same mold.
Yeah. Over the past 3 weeks, 10th round player in 9-cat formats, 12.8 points, 10.9 rebounds, 0.8 steals, 1.1 blocks, and shooting 58% from the field. Now, you're going to punt free throw percentage a little under 66%, but we've seen that happen before, like Nick Claxton is one example where you can still get good value despite not having a good free throw shooter at the center position there. So, yeah, 40% roster in Yahoo leagues. Only thing that stinks right now is the schedule. They have that Thursday, Friday back-to-back, and that's it for week 9. But I'm starting to think he may be worth a roll of the dice even with that poor schedule for week 9, just because of, as we both mentioned, the role that he plays within that rotation.
Yeah, I agree.
And the other rookie who's kind of stepped up, Zach Edey returned from his ankle injury that sidelined him for about 3 weeks or so. And he's back in the starting lineup now. I think one of his watershed moments may have been Thursday night when Draymond Green attempted to punk him, and Mr. Edey was having none of it. He seemed kind of amused by it in the blowout win for the Grizzlies, if anything. But Zach Edey is a starter. How does that kind of change or impact your outlook on him in terms of fantasy value?
Yeah, I mean, if it sticks, then I think it makes me a little bit more excited about him. This is kind of what we were expecting when we drafted him to start the season. I'm pretty sure he had the best ADP out of all the rookies just because it was like he was going to be starting on a playoff team. Centers traditionally have success earlier than guards. All he's got to do is grab some rebounds, block a shot or two, and hit some layups off passes from Ja Morant. He's a top 100 player. If he's getting 25 minutes per game, I think that's something that he can do, and that's kind of what he's had over the last few games since he returned. The double-double in his first game back, he had 8 points, 8 boards, 2 blocks against the Warriors, 10-6 in their last game against the Hawks. Yeah, I think that he is a guy that should be rostered at this point. I'm not sure how much more upside he has than what he's shown the last few games. So I think he's a rosterable player, but I don't think he's going to get to 20 and 10 with 2.5 blocks. I think you're looking more like, frankly, like 10 and 8 and a block, maybe a block and a half with a high field goal percentage. So nothing, I guess maybe not like a must roster, like drops whoever just to get him on your team, but he's a rosterable player.
Yeah, he's been averaging those exact numbers since he returned, as a matter of fact. So it's kind of funny you brought that up.
Maybe that's where I got it from.
Yeah. Hey, all good. But because they have a bit of a surplus in the front court. You think about Jaren Jackson Jr., Santi Aldama has been outstanding this year. Brandon Clark, he started for a bit. He's in there. We haven't seen much of Jay Huff. He's been injured recently, but even before that, the minutes have kind of decreased for him. But you think about 4 guys that Edey's going to be sharing rotation minutes with. His ceiling is a bit limited this year, but I think he can provide a reliable floor as long as he's playing 25 minutes per night.
Yeah, I agree. It'll be kind of exciting to see if these 2 guys are continuing to be the starting centers for these teams. Is there anybody else in the Rookie of the Year conversation at all? Like, obviously, if somebody just randomly starts popping off, then sure. But at this point, it seems like, and it's probably too early to even say, it's like a 2-man race. These guys are set up to have a lot of success. It'll be interesting to keep an eye on.
Yeah, Jared McCain could have been that guy, but obviously the knee injury kind of pulled the rug on that, unfortunately. Now, we kind of move on. Obviously, basketball is starting to heat up here, but football is approaching the postseason. And with Week 17 on the horizon, that means a critical matchup with NFC playoff implications on Sunday Night Football. The Falcons, led by rookie Michael Penix Jr., head north to battle Jaden Daniels and the Commanders on Sunday Night Football. Coverage begins on Sunday, 7 p.m. Eastern on NBC and Peacock. And now we're going to, unfortunately, go back to a few more injuries in New Orleans. Trey Murphy rolled his ankle during the third quarter, that overtime loss to the Nuggets. I don't even know what to say about the Pelicans at this point. It's like just when things are going well, as they were playing really well last night, something bad has to happen. So, I mean, does this make Brandon Boston worth a look again? Or are we kind of just, with the two-game week, not really bothering with it?
I don't think he's worth picking up in a 2-game week. I think that he is a guy that will benefit from this injury if Trey Murphy ends up missing time past this 2-game week, or if he's a guy to maybe pick up like later on for their last 2 games since it's later in the week. But Jordan Hawkins also seemed to be a guy that was benefiting a lot. All of his values pretty much points and threes, not giving you a ton in other categories. But I would assume that he's the guy that slides into the starting lineup, assuming nobody else comes back from injury or nobody else gets hurt, in which case more minutes open up. But I would assume that Brandon Boston gets extra minutes off the bench and is a guy that could be a little bit enticing, but Hawkins is more so that guy to me. Yeah,
that's a good point there. We mentioned the Hawks a little bit earlier. Trae Young dealing with a heel injury. I haven't received an update on his status for tonight. I believe he's still questionable. So I don't know. Like, they started Vic Krejci their last game out, but neither he nor Keaton Wallace provided much in that role. I am intrigued by what a Young absence can do for Dyson Daniels and Jalen Johnson from a playmaking standpoint. What do you kind of think about those guys moving forward, and maybe as supplementary playmakers when Trey gets back too?
Yeah, Jalen Johnson was pretty much already the number 2 point guard option since Kobe Buffkin went down. Keaton Wallace has had some games at times during the year where he's pretty solid, but not really a fantasy guy. Just like a solid rotation piece, kind of prove that he deserves a spot in the NBA. Great to see. But yeah, seeing Jalen Johnson, a couple extra assists, and Dyson Daniels as well. I knew that Dyson Daniels was a pretty good playmaker, but he just didn't need to be even like a secondary playmaker with the Hawks because of Jalen Johnson. like a tertiary playmaker. So seeing him kind of move up, get a couple extra assists was good to see. And I think that if Trae Young misses another game, that, yeah, those two will probably be the top two playmakers. Having some other guys that can just pass pretty well, like Krejci can pass the ball pretty well. Larry Nance Jr. is a pretty good passer for a big. Bogey isn't a bad passer. Keaton Wallace will probably get you a couple assists. That's pretty much what happened in their last game as well. But it will be Jalen Johnson and Dyson Daniels as the heavy playmakers. But when Trae Young gets back, I'm not sure that they're like, oh, Dyson Daniels was a pretty good playmaker. Like, let's give him this massive usage bump with the ball in his hands. Like, I don't really see that happening. It's like, it's great that it happened when Trae was out because it needs to happen when Trae's out. But I'm not sure how much it changes long term. But if Trae Young misses another game, then yeah, both those guys will continue to be the top playmakers.
Yeah, sticking with the Hawks, Onyeka Okongwu going to miss another 2 games, if I'm not mistaken, at a minimum because of his knee issue. Larry Nance Jr., a name you mentioned earlier in the show, pretty much prime time to add him, correct?
Yeah, definitely. That first game that Okongwu missed, I think he hit 5 threes off the bench. And in this last game, he had 10 boards, 3 blocks. I mean, he shot 1 of 6 from 3, but he'll continue to shoot them. I think that the Hawks are kind of recognizing that actually opens up a lot more for Trae Young than having, this dominant, I don't even want to say dominant, like a pick and roll guy. Like Clint Capella and Okongwu. I mean, Okongwu has been a little bit better as a floor spacer, but nothing like what Larry Nance has done the last couple games and just since he came to the team. But Capella's a great pick and roll guy for Trae Young, and he's one of the best pick and roll operators in the league. But if you have a guy that can also do some pick and pop stuff, that just opens up the floor for Trae Young even more. Like, he needs space to operate. Like, it just helps him so much more. So maybe this is looking pretty long term, but the Hawks recognize, hey, having a guy that can do all the things that Capella has been doing or Okongwu has been doing that can also space the floor is something that just gives them a whole new dynamic to this team, especially with Trae Young. So hopefully that's something that they'll either acquire at the deadline or maybe look more into this offseason because it just makes the Hawks even more dangerous. But we'll be keeping an eye on that. Larry Nance has been, I think he's a guy that is worth streaming, maybe not like a top high priority streaming option on a day with 14 games, but could be a pretty good ad because they have 4 games total this week. So they'll have 3 more after this, which is still more than some of those teams that are only playing 2. So that benefits him a little bit. Nothing on Christmas Day. So I think he is definitely a guy. If Okongwu remains out, then he's going to play a lot. But when Okongwu gets back, they have shown that they're not that invested in Larry Nance that they'll just want to keep him in the rotation. So he's a short-term streaming option unless something has changed so that they're just really excited about that. We can go down to Miami with another injury, this one being to Jimmy Butler. Let me just pull up. I can't remember if he's questionable or doubt. Believe he's questionable for tonight. Yes, he's questionable tonight with the stomach illness. The ankle injury has also been bothering him a little bit. Miami's rotation has been a little bit iffy, interesting, however you want to put it, recently with Jimmy Butler out of the lineup. Just looking at their last game, Terry Rozier had one of his best games of the season, 23 points in 33 minutes off the bench against the Magic when they kind of blew a pretty sizable lead there in the fourth quarter. Drew Smith moved into the starting lineup. Nikola Jokic got the start as well, but he wasn't all that exciting. So it's interesting because Pelle Larsson was totally out of the lineup in their last game, and then he played 24 minutes. Or excuse me, was totally out of the lineup in the previous game, played 24 minutes in their last one. So it's hard to say exactly who's the best beneficiary to go with in Miami with Jimmy Butler sidelined. Obviously, Rozier, Drew Smith, Jaime Jaquez, Pelle Larsson. I don't know, Raph, which one, if it's Jimmy Butler remains out tonight, which guy would you be most excited about streaming or I guess adding to your team?
I don't know if excited is the right word, but I'm intrigued by Drew Smith. I don't think he was someone that many expected to start that last game, but he did, and he played pretty well. So I think he would be the one to kind of look to because you can certainly find him on most of your fantasy waiver wires at this point. Terry Rozier, even with his recent play, he's still rostered in a lot of fantasy leagues right now. So he's not really going to be someone to find. 65% rostered, while Drew Smith is way down at 6%. So if you're looking for someone to gamble on, I think he may be a better choice than Jaime Jaquez or Nikola Jokic at this point.
Yeah, I agree. It's like you said, not super excited about any of them. If Jimmy Butler misses a night with 14 games, I'm not looking to stream any of those guys.
Yeah.
So yeah, better just look elsewhere. But later on in the week, that could be a little bit more of a story, in which case I feel like the one I trust the most is Jaime Jaquez, but he wasn't getting the minutes. So it's like I don't know if I trust Eric Spoelstra to commit to one player enough for me to stream any of them. I'm probably just looking elsewhere.
Yeah. I think in terms of major injuries, that may be about it. Josh Giddey with the ankle. Not really sure you're going to be adding Patrick Williams at this point. Even though he's back in the starting lineup, he just really hasn't done much with that role. Tari Eason sits out on Monday with a leg issue. I mean, Amin Thompson's already rostered in most leagues, so you kind of really aren't looking for anyone else there. I think Jayshawn Tate, his relevancy as a fantasy player, that expired a couple years ago, unfortunately, but he may be in the rotation on Monday too. So.
Yeah, and I think seeing Cam Whitmore back in the rotation was kind of cool as well, but not a guy that I'm looking to add.
Yeah, it's a good point there. Looking ahead to this schedule, obviously you've got the 14-game day tonight. 4 games for looks a little over half the league right now, but the 4 teams to avoid: Cleveland, the Clippers, New Orleans, and the Kings. There any streaming options you're looking for in terms of this week's schedule?
I mean, I know we talked about Larry Nance a little bit. I think he's a guy that, even if he's not a super exciting streaming option, the fact that the Hawks play 4 games, that makes me want to at least take a look at that. John Morant's back, so not too worried about Scottie Pippen Jr. anymore. Pretty much everybody else that I'm looking at, the teams that play 4 games, I'm not seeing a ton of other great streaming options. Just off the top of my head, any ones that you were looking at in particular?
I considered Obi Toppin in deeper leagues. 26% rostered right now. He's only averaging about 21 minutes per game for the season. However, over the last 3 weeks, slightly higher, 21.6, and he's providing 3rd-round fantasy value. So this might be a case of kind of going with the hot hand, see where that takes you. He's not going to play starters minutes, but given what their center position is behind Miles Turner, he's going to play decent minutes in that role. So I think he would be someone to keep an eye on with a 4-game week for the Pacers. We discussed Orlando earlier. I think Anthony Black, maybe Cole Anthony is back on the fantasy radar just because of their need for his scoring at this point. So,
yeah, he had the big game on Saturday, but I'm not confident that that's going to be something that he can do or anywhere remotely close to doing with any sort of consistency. I feel like Anthony Black is the safer option, but it was really cool to see Cole Anthony play that well.
Agreed there. Before we get into some holiday gifts, you also have some Premier League festive fixtures on NBC, USA, and streaming on Peacock beginning Monday, December 23rd and running through January 6th. You'll give you some of the greatest gifts, magical moments, and holiday cheer on the pitch. Don't miss a moment of the drama and excitement from the best players in the world. Last but not least, we're going to talk some holiday gifts. I decided to wear my Diego Maradona-inspired holiday sweater just for the occasion. You guys heard Dan Titus' fantasy gifts last week, and today will be our turn. The first question: who has been the greatest present for fantasy managers thus far this season?
I can share mine first. That way you can talk about yours because it's more than just for fantasy managers for you. But, mine I had was Kristaps Porzingis. He's the guy that's been really good, has been for a little while. And I think what makes him a gift is that he returned early. You don't see that happen a ton. A lot of times with these like early season, like major injuries or off-season injuries, it ends up being a longer timeline than what we're expecting. And a lot of people are saying, oh, like by Christmas, but Boston has no reason to rush him back. Like it could be later. And then he shows up around Thanksgiving, I think before Thanksgiving. And obviously, the back-to-backs still kind of annoying that he's not, but like that was the expectation when you drafted him. Hey, this guy's not going to play back-to-backs ever. And he's been really good. Second round value in 9-cat leagues, pretty typical stats for him. So yeah, no, I think it's an absolute gift that he's been able to play already and log 9 games, especially for the guys that drafted guys like Joel Embiid or Zion Williamson, or even more of a mid-round guy like Emmanuel Quickly. Kristaps has already logged more games than those guys. So if you were like, I don't really want to draft Porzingis because he's not going to play for a while, and then you end up drafting those guys, then that stinks.
Yeah, that's a good point on him. To get him back as early as he did, that really changes things for category league managers, given what he's been able to provide, even with a limited role early on. So really good call there. My pick, as Noah alluded to, will be a New York Knick, and it's Karl-Anthony Towns. I think we all expected his fantasy value to increase with the move from Minnesota to New York. I don't think anybody expected top 5 fantasy value, though. He's been outstanding. Been the occasional game of foul trouble, but overall, he's been the real deal. He's fit in almost seamlessly with that group. So, yeah, he would be my pick for the greatest gift of fantasy managers to this point in the season.
I like that one. It was freaking excellent for your team now, especially the way it's looking back. And it's pretty obvious who won the trade.
Boy, I hope they clean some things up in Minnesota, but
yeah,
it's not looking good right now. We'll say, put it that way. On the flip side, who has been the proverbial lump of coal for fantasy managers thus far?
To me, it's been in Golden State, Brandon Podziemski. He's a guy that he was one of my top late round targets. Got him in multiple leagues and was, along with Dyson Daniels. So I wasn't all misses. I did get, another late round target, worked out pretty well for me, but Podziemski was the guy I was expecting to be really good this year. I think the Warriors were expecting him to take a step forward this year. It just hasn't happened to this point. He's had a couple good games, and the last 2 games he's been pretty good. So hopefully that's a sign of things to come. He's just shrugging off a slow start, but they didn't want to trade him in order to bring in Lauri Markkanen, which, who knows where Golden State would be if they had made that kind of deal. Probably a little bit better off. And they also said they wanted him to shoot 8 to 10 threes a game. And obviously that hasn't happened. But in my mind, I'm like, if you want this guy to shoot that much, you must believe in his shot.
Yeah.
Clearly that hasn't really been a thing. He didn't start from day one like we were expecting him to. So it was, maybe I was falling into a little bit too much of the offseason talk, which not that I believe that he was going to shoot 8 to 10 threes a game, but I was expecting him to be really good. And it literally just has not happened outside the top 200 this season. Hopefully that can fix, but as of right now, I'm not very optimistic.
Yeah, between the limited production and the number of guys they have in that rotation, it's going to be tough. But yeah, I think we kind of have similar ideas here. You went with like the preseason talk, maybe not being what it should have been. I may have fallen for the preseason muscle watch because my pick was someone I used quite a few middle round picks on. That'd be Zion Williamson. You hear he's looking better. He's in better physical shape. He's healthy. Yet here we are in December once again with him taking up an IL plus spot because he's dealing with a hamstring issue. Still don't know when he's going to be back, but it's tough because I think he's too talented to be like on a do not draft list, but the track record kind of speaks for itself at this point. And I'm starting to wonder if fantasy managers, depending on what we see from him the rest of this year, maybe go into next year, even if he explodes and says, I'll let that be someone else's problem in terms of building my roster at this point.
Yeah, I think he was a fine player to draft in the middle rounds, but obviously we were expecting him to play a little bit more basketball.
Yeah.
I saw this on Twitter. It was Mike Breen, I guess, before that game, where he's talking about they showed Zion on the broadcast on the camera. He says, "There's Zion Williamson in a familiar spot on the bench in street clothes." I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so rude. But like at the same time, that's just what it's been. Like, I don't know. I don't think anybody's like. I would love to see him play basketball very soon. If he suited up tonight, I'd be happy. But like, man, it just hasn't happened, and that's just frustrating. So yes, this has been a lump of coal.
Yeah, the Pelicans in general, like outside of Yves Missi, it's been a rough watch to put it kindly. But hopefully they can clean some things up. Once the calendar flips 2025, maybe that's all they need. Just in 2024. Mercifully at this point. And then another question, who is a player that you think can kind of take a step forward after the holidays? Almost like that you have that relative who buys you like instant scratchers and you just kind of don't think anything of it, but you end up getting some pretty good value out of it somehow. Who's a player that you think can be someone that can kind of step up their play as the season moves past the holidays here?
Well, I'm not going to say that my answer is like a random one that I wouldn't expect to that can, but Devin Vassell's a guy that's been a little bit underwhelming to start the year with good reason because of the injury that had him sidelined to start the season, and then missed a few other games, like 5 straight games here and there. But I think he's back in the starting lineup. He didn't do much in their last game, but they only played 23 minutes because it was a blowout. Well, I mean, I guess by the time this comes out, they'll play the 76ers on Monday, so that'll be a little bit different. But I think he's a guy that's been a very, very good fantasy player. And then so far this season, he's just the only reason he hasn't been able to be like a top 50 player is because his minutes are down. He's been pretty limited to start the year. They're taking their time with him, but he's having the best shooting season of his career. And I'm expecting that as the minutes tick up, he's back in the starting lineup. He's gonna be what we know he can be after Christmas, and maybe even starting on Christmas.
Yeah,
I know you don't want to see that, but maybe on Christmas.
Yeah, that's a good call there. He's obviously a very talented player, a key piece for the Spurs moving forward and in the current. So I wouldn't be surprised if he turned things on. I went with Jalen Duren. He's been a bit of a disappointment thus far. Close to a top 75 player last year, outside of the top 175 this year. One of the issues has been the foul line. He shot 79% last year, down to 58.3. The attempts per game are similar. So kind of wonder if last season was a mirage in that regard, or I don't know what's going on there, but the drop in free throw percentage has had a lot to do with him scoring a little over 4 points fewer per game this year. He's shooting 70% from the field. I think maybe part of it is like the pieces around him have improved. You add Tobias Harris, Tim Hardaway Jr., Malik Beasley, Cade Cunningham being healthy. Those guys are going to get more shots. I think if anything, you're kind of hoping for more defensive production from Duren, but the blocks are up, but it doesn't really feel like he's done too much. The rebounds are down over 2 per game as well. So I'm expecting him to kind of bounce back and play better basketball after the holidays. I think that should be more than enough time to kind of get used to his role within the system that JB Bickerstaff is running there.
Yeah, hopefully, because he was drafted pretty high with the expectation that he was going to be really good. The minutes are down, like you said. His play's been So yeah, I'm hoping for the same thing. I think a lot of people are. I'm holding out hope, and I think I still have him in one league. Maybe it was the only league I got him in. But yeah, I hope you're right because I need him to play better.
Yeah, definitely. Final question before we wrap this up. We got 5 games on Christmas Day. Noah, which one are you most looking forward to watching?
Yeah, I think I tried, or I guess I kind of knew what your answer was going to be. So I was figured out to talk about a different game. That way we could, highlight the other games that are also be really good. But the Western Conference Finals rematch at 2:30 Eastern time will be the second game of the day. Minnesota against Dallas. Obviously, everything changes if Luka doesn't play because it goes from a fantastic game to a pretty decent game.
Yeah.
Seeing Luka and Kyrie obviously versus Anthony Edwards is going to be the exciting part of it, but us basketball sickos will also be enjoying the elite defenses of both teams. Some very, very good on-ball defenders between guys like Jay McDaniels, PJ Washington, from either side. I think, and Nikhil Alexander-Walker. I mean, there's other very good defenders. Let me not say that those are the only ones, but I think it'll be interesting to see. Like, Dallas has been really, really good this year. Minnesota's been a little bit underwhelming. Can Minnesota use this game on national TV with everyone watching to kind of like turn their season around? Will Dallas be able to kind of make another statement? Or I think there's some extra narratives there that are worth watching. Two teams that, play hard, and, you have, a little bit of, I guess, attitude with both teams, because like PJ Washington will do his things with his arms crossed, and then Anthony Edwards obviously isn't afraid to trash talk anybody. So hopefully there'll be just some added emotion to the game, make it a little bit more exciting.
And Julius Randle tends to play well when he returns home. He's from Dallas, so I think if you're a Timberwolves fan, you're hoping that's the case, because that part of the trade has been a bit disappointing, as has Dante DiVincenzo, not really offering up much production in his role either. So obviously, as Noah alluded to, my pick will be Spurs Knicks. Knicks are always playing on Christmas, so that's no surprise there. But Victor Wembanyama playing on this Madison Square Garden stage on Christmas, I hope he doesn't explode to the level he can, but it's kind of like the perfect platform for it. And noon Eastern tip, that's about dinner time in Paris. And I believe they eat it like a traditional dinner time like we do here. They don't have like the Spanish siesta or what have you, but 6 p.m. local time, people are going to be wide awake watching their latest phenom play basketball. And I think that's going to make for a fun game. I think Philadelphia, Boston, obviously the 76ers have been disappointing thus far, but maybe a game like this can kind of spark them a bit, from a competitive standpoint, going up against the reigning champs and a longtime rival. LeBron and Steph, as always. And then that last game, Denver-Phoenix, Aaron Gordon had one of the greatest in-game dunks I've ever seen in a game against the Suns on Christmas a couple years ago. Maybe we get some similar, fireworks in that one, but wall-to-wall basketball on Wednesday. So really looking forward to it. Again, thanks as always for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on a different streaming platform, podcast platform, apologies for the technical difficulties earlier, but like anything else this time of year, we got through it. So thanks again. Thanks, Noah. No Q&A this week or next week, just a little housekeeping there. So no Q&A on Tuesday, next 2 Tuesdays, but we will be back next Monday, and then Titus will be back as well. So thanks again for tuning in, and take care.